Next up, it's Ed Gillespie. Ed, over to you.
Okay, I'm going to try and take you on a bit of a roller coaster. I've only got 10 minutes, but I'm going to try and talk about starting Futerra, some of the creative things that we've done over the last 7 years, and I'm going to try and meld that all together in a kind of suitably seamless fashion in terms of talking about going around the world without flying. I know that sounds like a lot of things to try and stick into 10 minutes, and it probably is, but we'll see how we get on. Okay, starting your own business. We started Futerra in 2001. We were very lucky to get some funding from Nesta, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. And we wanted to experiment. We wanted to challenge the status quo around the perception of sustainability and the environmental movement generally. So it's really about creating knowledge, challenging beliefs and inspiring action. And our founding principle was to make sustainable development so desirable it becomes normal. We really wanted to agitate, and work around this thing and make this stuff sexy, make it attractive to people, make it aspirational. You've got to remember that this was 7 years ago. So when you're working on things like climate change in 2001, it was a bit like wetting yourself whilst wearing a dark suit. No one noticed, but it gave you a warm feeling inside. Now, obviously, everywhere you turn now, everyone's talking about climate change. And so we were considered slightly freaky then. And now everyone's saying, I wish I'd had that idea. So being ahead of the game is also helpful. We've now worked with all sorts of organisations from all around the world. We have a staff of 25 based in London and New York. And that's actually increased in the last 2 years. We have a sort of 90% growth rate year on year. The biggest thing for me about building a successful team is having the people with the same passion and the same values and the same desire to change things, not least because they work much longer hours, which in a communications agency is absolutely essential, but also because they give a shit, and without sort of being too colloquial about it, the big difference that we have is that we actually deeply care about the work that we do. We're not trying to flog cat food on one hand and catalytic converters on the other. We actually passionately believe in all the work and the projects that we're involved in. If you wanted to try and explain how we worked, I'm not going to dwell on this because this is in Mandarin. You probably find it a little bit hard to decipher. But it's think tank, plan tank, do tank. We try and come up with thought leadership which challenges the status quo. We deliver the big strategies which are able to address some of the kind of attitude and behaviour challenges we face. And we do the delivery. So we organise the events, we run the media programmes and press relations, build the websites or whatever. And it's very much motivated by this hate something, change something. I don't want to paraphrase Honda there too much. But on the fashion front, and as I said, and as was pointed out by our chair, that I feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about fashion. It's mainly because everyone at Futerra would laugh when they said I said I was going to be talking about fashion this evening. But we've been heavily involved in a lot of the ethical fashion work. We did a lot of work on BBC Thread and did all the kind of press and media relations around making that a success. You may have heard of our swishing parties, swishing.org, and essentially clothes swapping parties. And I know that's nothing new, and there's been all sorts of swapping parties of various different levels of dubiousness. But we focused on trying to make clothes swapping sexy and trying to make it desirable. And my favourite one, actually, the spin-off, which also goes on, I think, just off Brick Lane. I can't remember what it's called. It's called Jumblist Massive, which I think is an inspired name for a kind of club afternoon with music and jumble sale combined. And we've also been involved as one of the founding partners, along with the Ethical Fashion Forum and Anti-Apathy, in the Refashion Awards, which are taking place in November. This is all about celebrating the best of ethical and responsible fashion. And again, you can go onto the website there, and they'll be taking place in about 2 months' time. So just very quickly about some of the motivations. Again, everyone talks about these things, people don't do anything about it. The joy of being a social entrepreneur is that you get to do something about the things that irritate you. Some people don't believe in climate change. Personally, I have done for about 10 years. So I feel like I've been working in the wilderness for some of it. But if you need any proof of global warming, you can just trace the trend in underwear, which takes us from the kind of Victorian knickerbocker all the way through to what my Scottish flatmate used to quaintly refer to as the eye patch. And just into the context of what we're dealing with here, this is how big the atmosphere is if you rolled it up into a ball and put it next to the size of the Earth. It's really vulnerable, really thin. So that's what climate change is affecting. And it's very easy to get very negative about these things. We've been through all sorts of peaks and troughs over the years about whether we're really ever making a difference. And it's very hard to sustain your motivation. But I believe ultimately we are going in the right direction, albeit slowly. And as long as we can just keep people like Jeremy Clarkson's mouth shut, then we might make some faster progress. Why did I go around the world without flying? And this is where I'm just going to talk about my slow travel trip with, I say, the fashion stuff kind of seamlessly or maybe slightly clunkily woven in. That's a map of the short-haul routes, the new short-haul routes that were launched across Europe this summer in terms of short-haul aviation, which is my personal bête noire. It's absolutely loopy. We are basically flying ourselves into oblivion at the moment, and so I wanted to demonstrate that you could probably have as good a time, if not better, by completely forsaking the aluminium sausage and staying grounded. And it's not like there's this big egalitarian opening up of aviation. It's actually half the UK population flies at least once a year and a quarter flies twice or more. It's the rump flyers, it's the frequent flyers who are actually causing a lot of these problems. There's lots of kind of relevant stuff also around holidaying in the UK, which is very obviously resonant with the credit crunch because we actually spend £18 billion a year more outside the country than we do internally. There's all sorts of idiots out there trying to convince us to fly more often. Michael O'Leary is just one of them. And there's no quick fix, unfortunately, on aviation. So I won't talk about these in detail, but you know, basically, there ain't a techno fix that's going to appear in the next 10, 20, or even perhaps 30 years. So we just have to cut down. It's as simple as that. And something's got to give. My favourite ever advert on aviation is "We are changing the skies" from Turkish Airlines. Now, have they any idea how literal that is? And for me, it's all about the journey as the reward. And you can look at this from an entrepreneurial perspective as well, because actually part of the satisfaction and the ups and downs of running a business is actually about the journey and the achievements you make. And if we want to try and get into slow travel, it's all about the quality of the experience, the transition of landscape, culture, people, language, really getting engaged in the countryside and the world you're travelling through. Everyone says the world's a small place. Travel over it without flying, and I reassure you, it feels a lot bigger. So we went around the world, not quite in 80 ways. I discovered that if you want to do 80 ways, you have to ride a lot of animals, not always available. And so essentially our trip was 45,000 miles, 31 countries, 381 days, 1.8 tonnes of carbon. And ironically, actually, if you stay in the UK, your average is about 4.5 tonnes of carbon. So save the world, go travelling. And there's not much quite a good motivation than that. That's the way we went. I'm going to have to go through these very quickly, or I'm going to eat into everyone else's time. But as you can see, sticking to land, lots of cargo ships. I wore my worn-again shoes, obviously recycled trainers, taking them all around the world, although I left them on a train in China, which was because that's where they were made. I thought there was a nice circularity to that. Started off the trip horribly, went straight into a storm in the Bay of Biscay, force 10 gale, don't recommend that at all. Then ended up in Siberia. This is me being baptised by a guy called Anatoly, who's like the kind of Tom Selleck of Siberia. He calls himself the fishing priest. You go ice fishing, and as soon as you catch a fish, he gets to beat you around the face with it. That's me dancing to Ra Ra Rasputin with some drunk Russian women. This is Mongolia. It's a busy place, as you can see. It's very similar to South London. Toilets in Mongolia are quite entertaining. There isn't usually one. You usually turn up at the yurt, or the kind of tents that Mongolians live in. You say, "Where's the loo?" And they just sort of go. It's me doing my Brokeback Mountain impression. It's in China. I really hope the Olympics does not remove the joy that is Chinglish from the world, because that would be a very sad day. That's getting into trouble by the Great Wall of China, which is surrounded by marijuana, apparently. And there's a whole story about Japanese customs, which I won't go into now. And that's a Japanese toilet, which are brilliant. And I defy anyone with any kind of natural sense of curiosity not to press all the buttons on the control panel next to them. Obviously, Japan has its own take on fashion. This is in Harajuku in Tokyo, where, you know, individualism and all these notions of kind of really pushing the envelope are very much to the fore, including some spectacular quiffs. This is the most obscure form of travel we took, the Zorb in New Zealand. It's like a washing machine, big plastic ball. You get in and they roll you down a hill. That's Fiona's new magazine favourite. Dodgy moustache. But I'll get to the point here. I mean, you can see where this fashion thing is going. Glasgow is apparently a very desirable place in Mexico. That's me as a wrestler. But really what I wanted to conclude on, because as we got back from this trip, is this is all about being pioneering. You know, everyone says this is a loopy thing to go and do, but it was about the challenge. And I think whether it's about business or whether it's about something which really motivates you personally, it'll make you the happiest you'll ever been just by having a go at doing it. And I think that's the biggest lesson that anyone can learn. And in the context of the challenges we face collectively, you know, human history is always a race between education and catastrophe. So if you can start a successful business which does the right thing, that's incredibly important. And especially in these kind of chastened times when everyone's talking about can we do the environment and the economy at the same time. We don't have a choice. We have to do both. And it wouldn't be right to conclude without including a quote from Martin Luther King. And I love this quote because I think it just sums up the nature of the challenge. And he said, cowardice asks, is it safe? Expediency asks, is it political? Vanity asks, is it popular? But conscience asks, is it right? And unfortunately, sometimes we have to ignore the fact of whether it's safe, whether it's politically acceptable, or whether it's indeed popular, and just do it because it's the right thing to do. Thank you very much.